yesterday's reading's great miracle, the healing of the paralytic. He was waiting by the pool, which from time to time an angel would come and stir the waters. And the first one who would come and would dip himself into the waters was made whole of whatever disease or affliction that he had. It's an interesting thing. In history, we have heard of miraculous pools and miraculous waters. We have in the tradition of the church the making of holy water at Theophany. The water is taken home with each of the faithful and is used throughout the year for the healing of afflictions. I will tell you this, is that in the pool that we see before us in the story is an example of God's grace to his people of the Old Covenant. For God is faithful. Even when his people have time and time again fallen away and been unfaithful, he was faithful to them. We should see this in our own lives as Christians because we are children of the New Testament. We are the Christians, the Christ followers, simply known in the earliest of earliest days, the way. And yet continually, do we not fall away every day? Do we not sometimes fall into sin? Even though we have been baptized, we have put off the old man and his clothes, and we have had removed from us that ancestral sin that had been placed upon us on the first days. But yet we go and sin again. Just as the Jews of the Old Testament did when they were in the desert. They were faithful for a time, but then they would slowly start to fall away. Even when his kingdom had been established, they fell away again and again and again. And so we see this small grace that was given even in the midst of that falling away, yet there was healing made manifest to them when they could not heal themselves. God was still merciful. But it was yet a very limited grace, was it not? For the angel would only come at certain times and stir the waters. At certain times. There was only one who would enter in and be made whole. Christ came. Perceiving the man who was upon his bed, he had no one to place him into the waters, for another one would always beat him to it. Jesus said to him, "Do you wish to be healed?" The man wondered at what he said. He said, "I have no one to put me into the pool. How can I be healed?" And then he said something most amazing. "Go, take up thy bed and walk. Your sins have been forgiven you." And that moment, the man was healed. It doesn't say that he was resting a few days and that he started slowly begin to walk, but he was healed that instant, wasn't he? And even though it was the Sabbath day, ignoring all that he knew from the law, he did as the man who had healed him told him to do. He picked up his bed, he walked. And as he walked away, some of the Pharisees were there, our good old friends the Pharisees. We always love to have our Pharisees in these stories because they're an example of unbelief. And so yet they found this man carrying a bed on the Sabbath, not realizing that this was the same man who lay upon his bed, who was lame, that he couldn't walk, he was a paralytic. But yet he was healed. They didn't see that. They just simply thought he was carrying this big heavy bed on the Sabbath when he's not supposed to do any work. So they said, "Why are you carrying your bed on the Sabbath?" And the man rightly told them, "He who has healed me told me to take up my bed and walk." And the Pharisees, in their unknowing and in their unbelief, said, "Who is this that has told you this thing?" Not that they marveled that he was healed, mind you, but they simply asked him, "Who is it that has told you this thing?" Because they were going to go and find him and probably bring him into the temple. And so Jesus, in the midst of the multitude, had already departed from this place. So they couldn't find him. Just as those of us who remain in unbelief will not find Christ. The Pharisees, in their unbelief, couldn't find him. And yet a while later, Jesus came into the temple and he found the man who had been healed and made whole in the temple praying. And he went up to the man. "Thou hast been made whole. So go and see that you sin no more, so that something worse may not befall you." Then the man went to the Jews and said, it was Jesus who did this for me. How many of us, after being forgiven of a great sin, do not go out and tell someone, the weight has been lifted from me. My sin has been removed from me. How many, after dealing with such a heavy burden throughout a long period of time, who have been made spiritually sick by this sin, have not, when healed, gone out into the people saying, I am in the midst of the glory of God, for I have been healed. A great burden has been lifted from me. I feel as if I am but a feather. You see, it is your belief, it's your faith that has made you whole. Is the faith in the only name which has been given under heaven for us to be healed. And the healing that he brings is not simply physical, but also spiritual. It is that healing that was given to the paralytic, not only of his physical infirmities, but also of his soul. And so, if we remain in disbelief, we remain in that paralyzed condition. We remain upon our sickbed, unable to bring ourselves to the edge of the pool of God's grace and his mercy, because it is disbelief that destroys our ability to move. It is fear that perhaps I have done something too horrible to be forgiven, that we remain in the disbelief of the Pharisees, that we can't be forgiven. And you see, when you bring this upon yourself, understand it is your own sin of disbelief that causes you to remain in this wretched condition. For a glory has come to us in the light of Jesus Christ, who has come to us. He has ascended the Mount of Golgotha. He hath ascended the cross in the flesh. He has died, and he has gone down into Hades, freed those who were there, and he has resurrected again. He ascended into heaven and sitteth at the right hand of God the Father Almighty. From thence he shall come to judge the quick and the dead. I believe. I believe. Brothers, sisters, Christians, children, disbelief is the thing that paralyzes. Disbelief and fear is what causes us to be paralyzed in our witness to others. You have been called out of the world to be Christ's followers. You've been called to be imitators of Christ. You have been called out into the world to go out and tell the world the wondrous things that Christ has done for you. For you have been healed from the original sin that would cast you into hell. You have been forgiven of that spiritual sickness of disbelief. But don't fall back into it. Don't fall back into disbelief. Don't lie down upon your sickbed and be paralyzed by inaction and disbelief. Who among us, after being cured of a horrible disease, would wish to lay back down in the bed that we have been ridden in for several years? Who would not wish to fling the doors and the windows open? Who would wish to run out into the fields and into all the people proclaiming, I have been made whole, I have been healed, I have been saved. This is the message that we are given today in the story of the paralytic. Do not fall into the sin of the Pharisees. Do not become a Pharisee. Do not disbelieve. Arise, take up thy bed, and walk. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.